Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Feds are likely to fall short of deadline for strengthening encryption and multi-factor authentication. Facebook outage, a prime example of insider threat by machine, and Robinhood breach impacts millions of customers. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. Now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, John Overbaugh, the CISO at Alpine Software Group. John, great to have you here.
Hey, Rich, it's good to be here.
All right. We, of course, want to thank our sponsor, Vulcan Cyber. We'll be talking about them later on in the show. And remember, join us on LinkedIn Live. We are there every single week now. You can just head over to CISOseries.com and look for the Week in Review page to find the link. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's dive right into these stories. First up here, like I mentioned at the top, feds are likely to fall short of deadline for strengthening encryption and multi-factor authentication. President Joe Biden's ambitious May cybersecurity executive order that was really coming in the wake of a lot of prominent cybersecurity incidents that had national security implications, is having trouble with implementation of multi-factor authentication and encryption at all civilian federal agencies. It's complicated because agencies have so many information systems to protect, as well as legacy systems, and then on top of all that, budget issues. The executive order requires agencies that don't meet the deadline to explain why in writing, giving officials a blueprint on the challenges still to overcome. So, John, this looks like a dilemma where obviously it's a very ambitious plan from that executive order, and we've seen a lot of desire to. We'll talk about infrastructure investment certainly later on in the show, but it's really just butting heads with the realities of physical infrastructure. What can really be done at this point? Is this the only approach that they can take, really?
Well, I think there's a couple of takeaways from this story, actually. So the first one really is everyone is learning or should be learning this. When you have an older tech stack, it takes a while to get things done. You can't just snap your fingers and add security on. There may be an urgency to address those risks, but it takes a little while to do it. It's complex. I think also there's a little bit of political will here and capital that needs to be spent. So there are organizations that are going to have to either push back on this directive or others. Really, it comes down to that challenge. You've got confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Most IT organizations are measured on their availability, but in this case, we're really trying to get to the point where we have confidentiality and integrity on top of it. What's to be learned here? Be careful with directives that come, unfunded mandates, if you will. And I think the other thing to be learned here is that security sometimes is chipping away. I think the major goal here is to be able to say each day, we're more secure today than we were yesterday. If we're making that kind of progress, that's progress in the right direction.
Is there a particular, obviously with the scope of the federal government, can we draw any parallels, I guess, from private efforts to do this, right? Where, we're talking about multiple federal agencies, multiple computer systems, it's not like we can just say, hey, everybody install this, or we're going to deploy this, because there's just such scope to this.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I'm not a member of the administration, so I'm not really sure what's driven these specific things, multi-factor authentication and encryption. Maybe it is their biggest gap. I think for me, though, the takeaway here is to really stop and think, what's my biggest return on investment for security? What are my greatest risks? And what are the risks that I can address with the least amount of investment, and bring those two together? So agency, I don't know what drug enforcement agency, maybe it's not a multi-factor authentication problem that they have to deal with. Maybe it's a third-party software sourcing problem. So I think one size fits all approach is not going to work in every case. That's what we can take away as private industry as well. We really need to stop and look at what our problems are today and what we can address today as well.
Yeah, and hopefully with these reports that are coming in as agencies aren't able to meet these deadlines, it'll give kind of that broader scope and kind of all the nuance that maybe a big executive order loses with the best of intentions.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
All right, Facebook outage, a prime example of insider threat by machine. An opinion piece published by Christopher Burgess at CISO Online suggests that the October 4th, 2021 outage at Facebook was a self-inflicted wound caused by its own network engineering team. A command was issued with the intention to assess the availability of global backbone capacity, which unintentionally took down all connections in their backbone, disconnecting Facebook data centers globally. He points out three key problems: that the failsafe failed, that managers may be subject to the Peter principle, and that ultimately Facebook overlooked their single point of failure. John, a lot to take in there. Obviously, a very high-profile outage. What's your take?
Yeah. Well, I'm not inclined to agree with the Peter principle, right?
That's
I'm
a little uncharitable.
Yeah, I think so too. And look, there's a lot of things to think about this, right? First of all, Facebook, we like to think of Facebook as brand new, right? It's social media, it's web 3.0 at this point. But really, they have a lot of technical debt. They've been around for years. So when you deal with all that tech debt, you have to have the opportunity to test these kinds of changes. It sounds like that's kind of what they were trying to do. And well, they found out it didn't work that well. I also think there's some great resignation impact here, right? So as the great resignation continues, you have all of this knowledge about trapdoors, complex dependencies, and so forth. All that knowledge is walking out the front door. So you've really got a challenge of keeping people around who understand what's going on and continuing to move forward with your older technology. So yeah, I guess maybe I'm just a little more generous than Burgess was in his article.
That's one of those situations where it's there, but the grace of God go I, right? Where it's like, I'm just glad I didn't press that button. I didn't stir the tanks and shut down, Facebook.
Exactly. Yep. And you know what? Kudos to them. One last thought. Kudos for them to even think that they could do this kind of test. There aren't a lot of companies that are willing to take this kind of risk. It didn't pay off for them, but at least they've got that forward thinking. Most companies are like, nah, we're not even going to touch our failover. We're just going to hope it works when we need it.
All right, our next story here. U.S. infrastructure bill includes cybersecurity provisions. One of the many features of the history-making infrastructure bill is a $1.9 billion boost in government cybersecurity spending. Obviously, this is a multi-trillion-dollar bill. This is a small part of it, but a big boost in spending in absolute terms. This includes a $1 billion grant program from FEMA to help state, local, tribal, and territorial governments modernize systems to protect sensitive data, information, and public critical infrastructure over the next 4 years. The bill also includes $65 billion for broadband expansion. John, there's been a lot of talk about was this enough money when we're talking about draft bills and stuff like that. Some is better than none, but I'm curious, what are your thoughts?
Well, look. First of all, I think it's a good bill. I'm happy that this administration is really paying attention to cybersecurity. Previous administrations have ignored the problem. It's a good start, but I worry about us putting all of our faith in this. Here's the point, right? The biggest challenges we face are talent shortages and the political will inside organizations to put off demands for new features in order to focus on boring things like fixing heaps of old steamy security vulnerabilities, right? So companies are going to have to prioritize their headcount to support it and resist that urge to believe they can just go buy technology and fix the problem with technology. The only way to solve the hiring gap is to take some chances on hiring. So hire college grads, hire industry transfers, train them when you get them on board, as opposed to trying to find that perfect security person, because there's just not a lot out there. There's a definite shortage of talent. You can have all the money in the world, but if no one can implement what you're trying to fix, you're not going to get anywhere.
All right, our next story here. Robinhood breach impacts millions of customers. Robinhood Markets disclosed that it suffered data breach on November 3rd, affecting approximately 7 million total customers. A threat actor tricked a customer service representative into providing access to internal support systems, from where the attacker then accessed email addresses of 5 million users and full names of approximately 2 million more. The attacker then attempted to blackmail the company, demanding payment. Super classy hacker. So, John, this sounds like social engineering 101. I'm curious, we had a high-profile Twitter breach about a year ago now, basically using this exact same playbook.
Yep.
Could you first of all, is there some sort of class action lawsuit action going on here? Robinhood has had kind of some troubles as of late with customers already. I'm just curious about your thoughts about these kind of attacks in general.
Yeah, I think, this is the classic attack, and it works. It's so much easier to social engineer someone than it is to hack into their systems in some cases. So I think we'll continue to see these happening. And It's kind of a shame. There is some technology that could help, like detecting anomalous behavior and things like that. But in the end, really, our controls are all just compensating controls or mitigating controls to protect from human failure. And that's what we see happening here with Robinhood.
All right. Before we move on to our next story, I want to spend a few moments talking about our sponsor, Vulcan Cyber. The fact that CISA felt the need to release the massive known exploited vulnerabilities catalog recently says everything we need to know about the state of our collective cyber debt. Attend the Vulcan Cyber Virtual Summit on December 9th and learn how your peers are working to take on cyber risk and mitigate known vulnerabilities at scale. Go to vulcan.io and click on the button at the top of the screen to register for the event. All right. Next up here after the break, hacking campaign now targeting Docker servers. This goes after my heart. Poorly configured Docker servers are being actively targeted by Team TNT hacking group. They're quite a dynamite group there. According to a report from Trend Micro, the campaign uses exposed Docker REST APIs to install Monero crypto miners, scan for other vulnerable internet exposed Docker instances, and perform container-to-host escapes to access the main network. Trend Micro has seen over 150,000 pull requests of a malicious Docker Hub account images during this campaign. Crypto miners, huge ongoing trend that we've seen here. Docker containers seems like an increasingly relevant threat surface here.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on this, John?
So first, don't get me wrong. I love Docker. I love containerization. But Docker containers represent the worst of third-party software composition, right? I mean, it's all packaged for you. Here's my take. Pulling a Docker container off the internet is like picking up a soda you found on a beach and taking a big swig out of it. You have no idea what's in there. I mean, it's from a network hygiene and security hygiene perspective, it's absolutely disgusting. You have to know what makes up your third-party components, or you're always going to be at risk. So, like I said, I don't think containerization is bad for you, like soda is. It just means you've got to be purposeful about how you approach using it. You have to stop and think through, maybe build your own container. It doesn't take that much longer to create your own container than it does to pull something down. When you build your own, you know what's in there. You know you don't have those backdoors.
It's interesting, obviously all of our listeners are familiar with the classic convenience versus security kind of spectrum.
Yeah.
Certainly, I don't think, containers are seen as an operational or an IT convenience, but looking at that security trade-off there, I think is underappreciated. So I appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, next up here, Trend Micro details long-running hacker for hire group. According to a new report, Void Ballure has advertised its services and offered on-demand intrusions since the mid-2010s, targeting IT companies, telecoms, and activists, as well as journalists and religious leaders. Initially, the group began offering the ability to break into specified email or social media accounts, pretty typical stuff, but then started shifting into advertising for the sale of private data from individuals in Russia in 2019. Usually Russia's a little off limits, so it's interesting to see that going on with this group. Long-running, successful group, kind of unusual in a lot of the things that we cover outside of APTs, where we see kind of organizations burn bright and then flame out. Kind of give hints that this might be a kind of a growing concern with this kind of model. Would this be something that the infrastructure bill would or should be able to place on its radar, these kind of groups?
Well, and that's a great question. I really do think this is the kind of research and support that government should be providing, and this is a good place to invest that money. It's not really possible for the government to reach into our systems and assess them for us, not to mention they already have billions of lines of code that they have to address themselves, right? So one thing government does really well, and maybe too well, it depends on your perspective, is intelligence and surveillance. And, to be able to watch to bring those resources to bear to protect our virtual borders like they protect our physical borders, I think that's a fantastic use of government resources. It all goes to show, though, that as long as there's money to be made doing nefarious deeds, there will be businesses that do it.
Next up here, bizarre backdoor now abuses Windows 10 app feature in social engineering. Call me back attack. On Thursday, researchers from Sophos Labs said the attack was noticed after the cybersecurity firm's own employees were targeted with spam emails sent by a Sophos main manager assistant from a one non-existent Adam Williams, which demanded to know why a researcher hadn't responded to a customer complaint. To make resolution easier, the email helpfully contained a link to a PDF complaint report. The fake PDF triggers the Microsoft Edge browser on Windows 10 to invoke a tool used by the Windows store application called appinstaller.exe to download and run whatever's on the other end of the link. Classic spear phishing story. It's nice to know that the classics still resonate with hacker groups here. This is kind of a question we come up on here, so I'm interested on your reaction here, John. Is this a situation where it's possible, like employee threat awareness training? Is that the solution here, or does that ultimately kind of put the blame at the kind of the lowest common denominator here for organizations?
Well, so first, I don't want to talk about blame, but let's talk about risk. And the risk is the end level user in an organization. In this case, they were targeting, kind of the analyst level. Mm-hmm. In other spear phishing attacks, you're targeting CEOs and other executives, right? My take on that is this. It is possible to raise awareness within your organization to a point where these attacks have a low success rate. I'm not going to say zero, but I'm going to say low. It takes persistence. It takes a positive reinforcement program. So rather than being punitive when you do a phishing assessment and someone fails it, make it positive. Keep in mind that in essence, what we're doing with these programs is we're empowering our users to be aware of danger. That pays off in the workplace as well as at home. A successful security awareness program has to be respectful, positive, repetitive, educational, and at the same time, always backed up with an effective incident management program. So defend, detect, contain, eradicate, and recover.
Yeah, to kind of make it the simplest analogy, I guess, is it's like, let's put up all the speed bumps. Again, it's classic security versus convenience. Mm-hmm. If there is a complaint, as an employee, the first reaction is, I just want to get this off my plate. I want to, I don't want my manager to find out, to find about this or ask me about this. I just want to clear this off my plate. But that kind of, the awareness training is kind of that first speed bump, but then, provide additional ways to limit the amount of damage that can be done, or just to force people to ask the question, wait a minute, is, Andrew Williams, Adam Williams, even a real person, stuff like that.
Well, and what was the title again? It was the main manager assistant. So, so look, it really, this does come down to awareness and consistent awareness across the organization. And as you talk about these phishing attacks and you remind people, phishing attacks will include a sense of urgency. Why haven't you closed this? They'll pretend to be part of your organization, that kind of thing. So a good awareness training, then an employee is going to open that email and be like, oh yeah, I get it.
If you have a chill office culture, this won't be effective at all. So
there you go. That's a great idea. Yeah.
Just relax. You'll be safe. Yeah. All right. And our final story here, drone loses battle against a power station. In July 2020, a DJI Mavic 2 drone approached a Pennsylvania power substation in what was an attempt to disrupt operations by creating a short circuit using a thick copper wire connected to the drone. This is the first known incident of using an unmanned aircraft system to specifically target U.S. infrastructure. And we've seen cyber threats against infrastructure grow. This is a little bit more physical than that. Yeah. The drone crashed on the roof before reaching its target, but the operator has not yet been found. The operator removed several sensors and cameras from the drone in order to avoid detection. DJI drones have a number of kind of fail-safes and monitoring systems and stuff like that, meaning it had to be flown by line of sight, and that likely led to the crash. John, kind of a sophisticated, kind of low tech and high tech at the same time, run something into the power station essentially here. But, does this kind of strike you as maybe more sophisticated, planned out, or a lone wolf style of attack? These kind of drones can be acquired for $1,000. DJI is the first one to tell you that cars and airplanes and all other modes of consumer available technology can be used to cause harm. So, hey, don't blame us. But I'm curious what your impressions are.
Yeah. So, given we've only heard of one such incident, to me, it sounds like a lone wolf, but I'm not qualified in domestic terrorism to make a definitive statement. The key here is that this incident underscores that every system has weaknesses and needs to be designed, built, tested, and maintained with one question in mind at all times. And this is the question I try to teach developers when I'm talking application security. I try to teach the product team when we're talking about product design. You have to ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen, or what could possibly go wrong? When you keep asking yourself that question, then you start to design systems that are built to be resilient from a number of attacks. This is a very creative attack. I mean, I hate to give credit for that kind of thing, but it is a creative attack. And I think we'll see more and more of those types of attempts where as you lock down one area, you lock down the cybersecurity, then we'll go to the other area and try the physical attack or, whatever. As people get smarter, we'll go one way. It's just responding to and looking for the easiest way in or the easiest way to disrupt.
All right, before we get out of here, John, any story that was a particular thumbs up or an eye roller to you that just kind of you had a reaction to?
I don't know if I want to call any of these stories a thumbs up, but honestly, the story that is most intriguing to me is the federal government missing that deadline because, when you throw out a mandate, everyone's on board. We're going to run after it. Now that's a challenge. And with the amount of work that we have to do in our nation, both from a federal and governmental perspective, as well as private sector, there's a lot of work to be done. And we don't have a lot of time to do it. So we do need to make bold initiatives, but we also have to make initiatives that are realistic and reflective of the status that we currently have today.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John Overbaugh, the CISO at Alpine Software Group. Truly appreciate your time and your expertise on the show. Where can people find you if they are so inclined?
Best place to look, I have a growing blog, so infosec.johnoverbaugh.com, and then also find me on LinkedIn, John Overbaugh.
Excellent. Thank you so much once again. And remember, if you enjoyed this show, you can come back next week for our Friday video chat all about hacking email security, an hour of critical thinking of alternative ways to protect messaging. That starts at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, followed by a meetup. And then we'll be back with another edition of the Week in Review, Friday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And if that doesn't sound like enough live content to you, we got you covered because we're doing a live show in New York City next Wednesday, November 17th, 2021, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're in the area, come and join us in the Meet Space, or you can watch virtually. Go to akeyless.io. That's akeyless.io to register. Remember, Cybersecurity Headlines is available every day. We'll get you caught up on the news of the day in about 6 minutes. All the details are at CISOseries.com. Until then, I'm Rich Straffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity Headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.